She waited 3 days at the station until the child in boots said, "Will you marry my daddy instead?" Duster, Wyoming Territory, spring 1874. The wind rolled down from the barren hills, tugging at the signs of Dustmare's only train station. It was a single-room shack with a bench too short for sleep and a stove too rusted for heat. Inside, Barbara Hart gripped a folded paper that had once promised a new life. "You're telling me?" she asked the station master. "There's no Ezra Whitlow in this town." The old man scratched his chin. "Been here 30 years. No Whitlows. Never were. I asked around, but I got a letter. Senor Portoris. He said he had a ranch near the foothills. It'd be news to me." "Are you sure it was Dustmere?" She held out the envelope again. "Ezra Whitlow, Dustmere, Wyoming Territory. Agency stamp." It looked real. It had felt real. Now it vanished like smoke. "You should wait inside," the man said kindly. "Nights get cold." She walked outside and sat on the bench. That was day 1. On day 2, she ate the last of her stale bread. Her carpet bag became a pillow. Townsfolk passed and whispered. Some offered biscuits. Most just stared. By the well, she overheard. "Another one. Third girl this year. Poor thing looks hopeful, too." She bit into a crust, too proud to cry. By the third morning, the station master brought her tea. "No word?" she asked. He shook his head, beginning to think Ezra never existed. "Some boys around here stirred trouble. Wouldn't put it past them to fake bride letters." Her grip tightened on the cup. "Happened twice last fall. Those girls left on the next train." Barbara looked to the hills where hope had once lived. She rose, brushed her skirt. "When's the next train east?" "Day after tomorrow." She nodded. "Then I'll wait a little longer." "Just not for Ezra. You don't deserve this," he said. She smiled faintly. "Most people don't deserve what they get." That afternoon, as she stood by the fence, a tug at her skirt startled her. She looked down to see a little girl, 5 at most, boots too big, dust in her braids, eyes like flint. "Are you the lady who got left?" the girl asked. "Pardon." "You got the bag," in the sad face. "That's what Miss Ellie said." Barbara almost laughed. "Yes, but I think I'm done being that lady." The girl tilted her head. "Will you marry my daddy instead?" Barbara froze. "I what?" "He lives out there. He needs someone. I think you're someone." Before Barbara could speak, the girl grabbed her hand. "Come on. I can't go to town alone. You better walk with me." "Who's your daddy?" "Thomas Callahan. He says he doesn't need a wife, but maybe no one's asked him, right?" Barbara hesitated, then followed. After 3 days on a bench, after losing everything, and what little hope remained, a child's hand was the first warmth she'd felt in a long time. They reached the ranch by sundown. A sturdy house, tired paint, leaning barn, 2 horses watching. A man stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands. Broad shoulders, dark eyes, a face carved in stone. Maisie ran ahead. "Daddy, I brought someone." He looked at Barbara, then his daughter. His face didn't change. "I didn't send for a wife," he said flatly. Barbara clutched her bag, but lifted her chin. "Then maybe someone else sent me here for her." She looked toward Maisie, and for just a moment, something in Thomas Callahan's face cracked. Not enough to smile, but enough to see the man still learning how to feel. Barbara Hart had every intention of leaving at sunrise. She had lain awake most of the night on the cot Thomas Callahan had reluctantly offered. Hard frame, thin blanket, silence loud enough to ring in her ears. Her bag was packed before first light, boots laced, her mind braced for one more rejection. But when she stepped into the hallway, she heard coughing, a soft, wheezing sound. Then a small voice, hoarser and pitiful. "Miss Barbara." Maisie sat curled in her doorway, flushed cheeks, watery eyes, no boots in sight. Barbara knelt. "You should be in bed," she whispered, touching the girl's forehead. "You're burning up." "I feel icky," Maisie said, trying not to cry. Barbara looked toward the kitchen. No sound of Thomas. She picked Maisie up awkwardly and carried her back to bed. She had never held a child before, but Maisie clung to her shirt without hesitation. Thomas appeared, drawn by the coughs. He stopped in the doorway, jaw tight. "She's sick," he asked flatly. Barbara nodded. "Fever light but real." He crossed the room in 2 strides, leaned down. Maisie reached for Barbara again. Thomas noticed. "She wants you," he said. "She never takes to strangers." Barbara smoothed the blanket. "Then maybe I'll stay. Just until she's better." Thomas hesitated, then gave a small nod. "There's water and broth in the pantry. If you know what you're doing." "I was a school teacher," she replied. "Not a nurse." He turned and left. That set the tone. Barbara stayed. Not for him, but for the child curled against her each night, muttering dreamsick nonsense. By day, she swept floors, fetched water, helped feed animals, nearly tripping over chickens or her own skirt hem. Nothing came easy on a ranch. Her hands blistered from pumping water. Her legs ached from crouching in the garden, and she bruised her thumb trying to split firewood. Maisie stayed sick 2 more days. Barbara read to her every afternoon from an old Bible she found, not for the verses but the rhythm. Maisie listened with heavy-lidded eyes, clutching Barbara's sleeve, thumb in her mouth. Thomas remained quiet. He came and went with the sun. He never asked Barbara to stay longer, nor thanked her. He spoke only in instructions. Boil water, watch the stove, more hay, and never called her by name. But she noticed him watching, not openly, but when she sewed a patch on Maisie's nightgown, she felt his eyes linger. When she stirred broth, he glanced at the bowl before passing, and when Maisie threw up unexpectedly, he brought the basin, set it down, and left. On the 3rd night, Barbara fell asleep at the kitchen table. She had been mending socks, Maisie's and Thomas's thick, dirt-stiffened ones, when her eyelids grew too heavy. The candle burned low, casting soft gold across her cheek. Thomas came in from the barn, smelled of hay and cold air. He paused in the doorway. He looked at her a long moment, then moved quietly, took the blanket from the rocker, draped it over her shoulders. His hand hovered near her hair, then withdrew. He blew out the candle, letting the fire light do the rest. He said nothing, but at the threshold, he paused and looked back. His expression unreadable, eyes darker than night, and for once not empty, watching her the way a man watches something he thought he'd never see again. Something soft, something good. Barbara stirred in her sleep, but did not wake. She breathed slowly, as if the blanket's weight gave her permission to rest. And for the first time since she stepped off that train, Dustmere no longer felt like a mistake. Not because of the man, but because of the child who clung to her without question, and the quiet way that child's father had begun to let his grief open, just enough to let in a thread of warmth, just enough to let her stay. Barbara rose each morning before the sun. She had grown used to the creaks of the old floorboards, the scent of dust and woods in the dawn. In the gray quiet, she moved through the house like breath through fabric, careful, unnoticed, necessary. She fed the stove, boiled oats, reheated broth Thomas left simmering. Maisie, still half asleep, and tangled in her curls, would trudge in and curl up at the table without a word. Barbara never needed asking. She tied the girl's braids, wiped her mouth, mended the unraveling hem of her sleeve. Thomas never said thank you. He would nod once, eat in silence, then leave for the fields, boots thudding heavy on the porch. Sometimes he paused near the barn's edge like he meant to turn, but never did. By the 2nd week, he no longer stopped her from joining him outside. He handed her a basket, gestured toward the garden, let her carry feed pails, showed her which chickens pecked, and which cow had a crooked leg. But he kept his distance. They worked in rhythm, not together. If he spoke, it was to explain a task. If she laughed when a goat chewed her skirt, or Maisie rode the farm dog, Thomas looked away, as if humor were a language he had forgotten. In town, whispers followed her. Barbara heard them at the general store. "She's the 3rd. Poor dear, pretty, too. I heard the last girl cried herself sick." She smiled at the clerk, ignoring it. She had weathered worse than gossip. But that night, as she folded Maisie's nightgown, the weight of those stares settled deep in her chest. She was not his wife. She was not supposed to be here. One afternoon, while gathering eggs, she caught a moment between father and daughter. Maisie sat dozing on the porch, thumb near her mouth. Thomas, fixing a shutter, froze when he heard her mumble. "Mama," Maisie sighed. Barbara froze. Thomas stood still, lowered his tool, and walked inside without a word. That night, he didn't speak at supper. Barbara tried to meet his eyes, but he kept them lowered. Maisie chattered cheerfully between spoonfuls. After dishes, Barbara sat by the window. The silence stretched between them like unspoken history. She couldn't blame him, but she couldn't stay. Not as something she wasn't. She packed in the dark, left the borrowed boots by the door, folded her apron, set a note beside it. "Thank you for letting me be here for a little while." She didn't sleep, just lay in bed, listening to the wind. In the morning, she rose early, but stopped in the kitchen. Thomas was already there. He stood at the stove, spooning porridge into a bowl while holding Maisie against his shoulder. The girl clung to him, flushed and half awake. Barbara blinked. He didn't look up. "I thought you were leaving," he said. "I still might." Thomas set the bowl down, then walked to her chair and draped something over it. Her shawl, the blue one she wrapped around herself each morning. Not the bench, not the stool, her chair. Then he picked up the spoon and stirred the porridge. Barbara stepped closer, fingers brushing the shawl. Thomas didn't meet her eyes. "Maisie, like your stories. And you." "I like that," she smiled. Barbara sat down. Her hands trembled. "Not from cold. You didn't ask me to stay. I didn't know how." And that was the first truth they shared. Not love, not yet, but something simpler. The beginning of a place not claimed by duty or accident, but chosen. It was nearly dusk when Barbara opened the wrong drawer. She had been searching for a clean towel. Maisie had spilled honey on her dress during supper, and Barbara had rushed to the wash basin to catch the stain before it set. The linen drawer near the fireplace, she thought. That was where Thomas kept the kitchen rags and sewing kits. But instead, beneath a layer of neatly folded cloth, her fingers brushed against wood. She pulled it out, a small worn box, the hinges rusted slightly, the corners rubbed smooth by time. She should not have opened it, but her hands acted before her conscience could catch up. Inside were papers, dozens of them, some folded, some creased, some left unfinished. Letters all addressed in the same looping careful hand. A merry barbarous breath caught. She did not read them all. She only unfolded the one on top. A page yellowed at the edge, ink smudged at one corner. It was dated nearly 5 years ago. But the pain in the words felt fresh. "I don't know how to live without you," it read. "But I'm learning because of her. She has your eyes when she laughs, and my silence when she doesn't. I don't know if that's a mercy or a curse." The letter trailed off there. No signature, no ending, just a last stray line written smaller than the rest. "I hate the mornings most. That's when you should be here the most." Barbara folded it back carefully, her fingers trembling. She was still holding the box when Thomas came through the door. He stopped short at the sight of her. Mud streaked his boots and a coil of rope hung over one shoulder. His eyes flicked from the open drawer to the box in her hands. He said nothing for a moment. Then his voice came low and sharp. "That's not yours." Barbara nodded. "I know. You had no right. I didn't mean to," she said softly. "I was just Maisie spilled something. I was trying to help." He took a step forward, eyes darkening. "I don't need help with this." Barbara didn't move. "I wasn't trying to fix anything." He stood there breathing hard. "You don't know what it's like," he said suddenly, voice tight. "To lose your whole world in a single night. To watch the only woman who ever saw you clearly bleed out with your child in her arms and then look that child in the face every day and pretend you don't want to fall apart." His voice cracked on the last word. Barbara's eyes filled, but she didn't blink. Didn't reach for him. Didn't flinch. "I'm not here to replace her," she said quietly. "I'm just here to be present." Thomas looked away, his jaw flexed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might say nothing, that he would retreat into silence as he always did. But instead, he whispered, "I wrote her every week after she died." Barbara didn't respond. She knew better than to interrupt. "I would sit in the barn, write like she was still somewhere, waiting, somewhere I could reach." He paused. "I never mailed any of them." "She would have read them anyway," Barbara said gently. He looked up. "She sounded like someone worth loving," she added. "She was," he said. "She still is." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls of the house, rattling the loose shutter. The fire cracked behind them. Then, from the back room, Maisie called in her sleep, a soft, breathy, "Mama." Neither of them moved at first. Then, Thomas exhaled, walked over, and closed the box. His hands hovered over it for a second longer than necessary. He didn't put it back in the drawer, just set it on the table. "I should have burned them," he murmured. Barbara said, "You should let someone read them." He turned to her. "Why you?" "I didn't choose it," she said. "But I won't turn away from it." For the first time, something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, but cracked. A layer peeled back. Beneath it was not warmth or affection, but something raw. Loneliness, the kind that had built walls so tall it forgot how to see over them. He gave her a long, unreadable look. Then, without another word, he left the room. Barbara stood alone in the kitchen, the letter still burned in her mind, those final unfinished lines echoing louder than they should. "I'm learning because of her." She placed the towel over the back of the chair and reached for Maisie's dress. Outside, the last light of day slipped below the hills, painting the windows with gold. Barbara packed her bag in silence. There was not much to gather, just a few dresses, a hairbrush, a worn book of poems she had brought from the city. Her shoes were dusty beyond repair. Her gloves had holes in the fingertips. She folded everything carefully, as if neatness could make leaving easier. She did not cry. The sun had not yet risen. The sky outside the cabin glowed faintly, stray with hints of lavender and gold. The house was still. Even the chickens had not begun to cluck. In the corner of the room, Maisie slept curled under her quilt. One arm flung out as if reaching for something in her dreams. Barbara watched her for a long time. Then she turned, picked up her bag, and stepped into the kitchen. Thomas was already there. He stood by the stove, pouring water into the kettle. He did not look at her. Barbara cleared her throat. "I'll be going this morning." He nodded, still not turning. She waited, hoped perhaps for a word, a question, anything. But the silence remained. So she said it out loud. I think I've stayed longer than I should have. Maisie's stronger now. You're both doing better." Still, he said nothing. Barbara's heart clenched, but she smiled a little. "Thank you for letting me stay." He finally looked at her. His eyes were unreadable, not cold, but distant, as if he had already braced himself for her absence. "I'll tell her you said goodbye," he said. "No," Barbara replied. "I want to say it myself." He nodded. When Maisie awoke, Barbara knelt beside her bed. The girl blinked, still heavy with sleep, and yawned. Then she saw the bag. "No," Maisie whispered. Barbara smoothed the child's hair back from her forehead. "I have to go, sweet pea." Maisie sat up fast, her lower lip trembling. "But why?" Barbara could not answer. Instead, she pulled the girl into a hug. "You're going to be just fine. Your daddy loves you very much." Maisie clung tighter. "But I love you, too." Barbara's eyes filled. She blinked quickly. "I know. I love you, too." The child's small hands fisted in the fabric of Barbara's skirt. "Please don't go." Barbara kissed her cheek. "You're so brave, Maisie, and so kind. You'll always have a part of me, even if I'm not here." She stood gently, prying the child's fingers loose. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Thomas stood at the door, arms crossed. Barbara stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting her like a wall. She walked down the path slowly, her bag in hand, her spine straight, though every step felt like it would break her. Behind her, the door closed. Then came the sound. A cry, loud, piercing, raw. "She's my mom now." Barbara stopped in her tracks. The voice Maisie's was full of hurt. Not tantrum, not defiance, just heartbreak. Barbara's hands clenched around the handle of her bag. Footsteps thundered behind her. She turned just as Thomas burst through the doorway, Maisie in his arms. The little girl's face was red and wet with tears, her hands still reaching for Barbara. Thomas caught up to her. He did not look like the man she had met weeks ago. The man who had spoken in clipped sentences and kept grief wrapped around him like armor. He looked like a father, like someone who had lost too much already and could not bear to lose one more thing. "She's not the only one who doesn't want you to leave," he said, voice rough. Barbara stared at him. Thomas held her gaze. "I don't know what this is between us. I just know it hurts when you're not in the room." Maisie clutched at his shirt, sniffling. Barbara reached out, her hand brushing the child's hair. Then she looked up at Thomas. "I don't need promises," she said softly. "Good," he replied. I don't have any, just reasons to ask you to stay. Barbara dropped her bag, and when she stepped forward, it was not just toward him. It was toward them. The storm rolled in with no warning. Wind howled across the plains, snapping branches and rattling windows. Rain pelted the roof of the cabin like fists. Inside, Thomas moved quickly, securing shutters while Barbara held Maisie close, humming softly to calm the girl's nerves. A flash of lightning split the sky. Then came the sound, loud, sickening, unmistakable crack. Then a deep echoing boom. Barbara's head snapped toward the window. A red roaring glow lit up the night just beyond the ridge. The barn, she whispered. Before Thomas could react, Barbara had already thrown on her shawl and bolted for the door. Brah! But she was gone. Mud splashed up her skirt as she sprinted across the yard. The barn loomed ahead, its roof already kissed by flame, smoke curling into the sky. Sparks danced with the wind, threatening the nearby shed. She skidded to a stop and grabbed a pail, fumbling for the water trough. Thomas caught up seconds later, eyes wide with disbelief. Are you insane? There's no time, she shouted. The mayor's still inside. Without waiting, she ran toward the barn doors, yanking them open against the resistance of smoke and heat. The air was thick, choking. Fire licked the rafters above. Inside, the mayor naid frantically, trapped behind a fallen beam. Thomas was at her side in an instant. Get the gate, he barked. Barbara didn't argue. Together, they lifted the scorched timber, screaming muscles, coughing lungs, soot streaking their faces. The horse burst forward as the way cleared, nearly knocking Barbara down in its panic. Out, go, Thomas urged, slapping the mayor's flank. Barbara stumbled outside, gasping. The horse galloped toward the open pasture, safe. The barn, however, groaned ominously. Leave it, Thomas called. But Barbara was pulling at more buckets. We can stop it spreading. He swore under his breath, but joined her. They worked through the worst of the storm, soaked and covered in ash. By the time the last embers hissed into the dirt, the eastern sky had begun to lighten. Barbara collapsed to her knees, breath ragged. Thomas knelt beside her. Let me see your hands. She didn't argue. Her palms were blistered, red and raw, where the rope and heat had seared her skin. Thomas took her hands gently, cradling them like something fragile. You're burned, he said, voice low. I'll live. You shouldn't have gone out there alone. You'd have done the same. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Yes, he said, but I've already lost too much. I couldn't bear. He trailed off. Barbara swallowed. The wind tugged at her hair, now matted with rain and soot. Her chest ached, but not from exertion. Thomas pulled a cloth from his coat pocket, wrapping it around one of her hands with practiced care. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was impossibly gentle. Then he reached for her other hand, holding it just a moment longer before wrapping it, too. His hands didn't let go. Barbara's breath caught. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. In the silence, in the ruins of smoke and morning haze, something passed between them. An understanding, a tether. Thomas stared at her hands in his. You stayed, he murmured, barely audible. Barbara lifted her gaze. What? His voice was when no one else did. Barbara didn't respond. Instead, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead lightly to his, their eyes closed. They stayed like that, suspended in that fragile, perfect moment, while the world slowly came back to life around them. Maisie's laughter would soon return to the yard. Chores would pile again. Dustmere's gossip would churn. But for now, the only truth that mattered was two people still kneeling in the wet earth, not saying what they both already knew. The kitchen smelled like fresh cornbread and pine oil. Barbara noticed it the moment she stepped in from the porch. The table had been cleared, scrubbed until it gleamed, and at its center sat a single oil lamp, casting a soft amber glow across 2 plates and 3 cups. Maisie stood at the edge of the table, her dress a bit too tidy for an ordinary evening, her curls brushed neatly behind her ears. Barbara blinked, caught off guard. What's all this? Maisie grinned. It's a surprise. Before Barbara could speak, Thomas stepped out from the hallway. He had changed shirts. The collar was slightly askew, but his hair was combed, and he held himself differently, still guarded, but with intent. He cleared his throat. I figured we owed you a real supper for everything. Barbara's heart skipped. They sat together at the table, the three of them. Maisie chattered between bites of cornbread and spoonfuls of beans. Thomas ate quietly, his gaze drifting off into Barbara, then quickly away. After the dishes were cleared, Maisie ran to the mantel and retrieved something from behind the lantern. She walked back with both hands cupped together like holding a precious secret. "I have something for you," she said, eyes wide. Barbara knelt down. "You do." Maisie nodded solemnly and placed a small hand-carved wooden ring in Barbara's palm. "Daddy made this for you." Barbara stared, breath caught in her throat. The ring was simple, smoothed by careful sanding, the grain of the wood warm beneath her fingers. When she looked up, Thomas had stepped closer. "I know it isn't much," he said, voice low, steady. "But I wanted you to have something made by my hands." Barbara stood slowly. Thomas met her gaze. "You were never meant to wait at the station," he said. "You were meant to arrive here." Barbara's lips trembled. "Thomas." And she reached out, took her hand gently. "I know. I don't come with ease. I don't come with a house full of laughter or soft memories. I come with scars, with silence, with a little girl who needs more than I ever knew how to give." Maisie climbed onto a chair nearby, watching with bated breath. Thomas took a breath. "But I also come with a promise that I'll spend every day learning how to deserve the kindness you've already given us." Barbara's eyes shimmered. He lifted her hand to his chest where his heart beat steady beneath her fingers. "Will you marry not just me but us?" For a moment, Barbara could only look at him, at the man who had once said nothing, felt nothing, opened nothing. Now here he was asking everything. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Maisie clapped her hands, jumping from her chair. She said, "Yes." Barbara laughed through her tears, and Thomas smiled. A real smile, quiet and whole. He slid the wooden ring onto her finger. It didn't glitter. It didn't gleam, but it fit. And in the soft light of the lantern, surrounded by nothing more than their shared silence and Maisie's giggles, the future began. Not grand, not loud, but steady and forever. 1 year later, the Callahan ranch no longer echoed with silence. Laughter filled the halls, Maisie's high-pitched giggles chasing behind the creak of Barbara's footsteps and Thomas's low hums as he worked outside. The shutters stayed open now, letting in the morning light. A flower box bloomed on the windowsill, stubbornly bright against the dusty backdrop. Barbara moved through the kitchen with ease, flipping pancakes in a skillet, while Maisie sat at the table, drawing with a stub of charcoal. Thomas entered with an armful of firewood, and paused just long enough to plant a kiss on Barbara's cheek. Something so natural now, it almost startled her when she thought of the man he used to be. After breakfast, while Maisie played in the dirt outside with her wooden dolls, Thomas stood by the mantel, staring at the empty frame that had hung there for years. The old photograph inside had long since faded, and the cracked glass had been removed. He turned slowly toward Barbara, a thoughtful crease in his brow. "I was thinking," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe it's time we put something in that frame again." Barbara set down her dishcloth. "You want to hang a picture?" He nodded. "A real one of us. The kind she'll never have to wait to be part of." Barbara smiled softly. "You sure? She's already in it," he said, glancing out the window to where Maisie crouched by the chicken coop. "It's just time the world saw it, too." A week later, they rode into town in their cleanest clothes. Barbara wore the blue dress Thomas always said matched the sky over Dustmare. Maisie had ribbons in her hair and a smudge on her nose she refused to wipe off. Thomas wore a crisp white shirt, freshly washed, tucked awkwardly into his best trousers. At the photographer's shop, the man adjusted the light, positioned them just so, and counted slowly. Thomas held Barbara's hand. Maisie perched on her father's knee, one arm draped around Barbara's shoulder. "Now hold still," the photographer said. They did, and when the shutter clicked, something changed. The photo came a week later, wrapped in brown paper. Barbara opened it gently, her fingers trembling as she lifted it into the light. There they were, 3 people, 1 family. No one left waiting. That evening, after Maisie went to bed, Barbara sat by the fire and pulled out the old wooden box, Thomas's box of unsent letters. She opened it slowly, taking out a few of the faded pages. Then carefully slid the photo into the box alongside them. Then she took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Dear Barbara, you thought you were forgotten. You thought your name would never be called and that your place in this world had passed you by on the train platform. But you were not forgotten. You were being sent, guided perhaps, not to the man you expected, but to the life you needed. To a girl who had a space in her heart that only you could fill. To a man who had stopped believing anyone would stay. To a ranch that did not need saving, but healing. You were not a mistake on a contract. You were an answer to a question not yet spoken. And now you are not waiting. You are home. She signed it simply, Barbara Callahan. When Thomas joined her on the porch later, he handed her a mug of warm cider and sat beside her in the quiet. The stars blinked above, the wind soft against the grass. She slept with the photo under her pillow, he said, smiling faintly. Barbara leaned into his shoulder. She belongs in it. Who will they? I don't know. They sat like that for a long time. The kind of silence that no longer held pain, only peace. Thomas turned to her. You ever think about what might have happened if that letter had gone to the right man? Barbara laughed. I think about what would have happened if that little girl hadn't walked up to me in those giant boots. He kissed her temple. Smartest one of us, she nodded. And the best matchmaker I've ever met. They both laughed then, warm and full. And in that laughter, the last of the loneliness faded into memory. The porch light stayed on a little longer that night, just enough to say, no one here waits alone. Not anymore. Thanks for watching. She waited 3 days at the station. A story of unexpected love and finding home where you least expect it. If you believe in slow-burn Western romance, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. New heartwarming tales every week only on this channel. Like, share, and saddle up for the next story.